Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Very grateful that we have been recently voted the fourth best strategic planning podcast out there. Thank you so much for those who have voted for that. I'm very grateful for everyone who has helped, guests, everybody included, and fans who've been a part of the process as well. So thank you. Secondly, I also want to keep in mind of those of our 40 Strategy Growth Workshop that we're beginning with and releasing, and we'll be having workshop coming soon. So if you are interested to learn more about that, go to 40strategy.com. Excited to have with us Paul Menig. He's the CEO of Business Accelerants, a consulting firm dedicated to fueling growth and building long-term value for small and mid-sized companies. He has over 35 years experience with some big companies out there, GE, Daimler Truck, etc. And Paul also has the 7 forces of business success framework. Paul, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Thanks, Carl. It's great to have a chance to talk with you again and with all of your listeners and watchers on YouTube and any other platform.
Absolutely. Well, welcome. So we had this discussion up front, and it's been an interesting day, and we won't talk about too details because it will be filmed a bit in the past. But what we are interested about in current day is you did label this term, companies are
terrified.
Terrified. I love that. Terrified. Explain to me what you're seeing right now and why manufacturing companies you're seeing are terrified right now.
So my focus from my experience is primarily in manufacturing, technology to support manufacturing, or technology to support transportation, because I worked in factory automation and I worked in the design of vehicles, everything from a nuclear submarine under the water to satellites in space. And all of those people have had to deal with tariffs since they were announced, and people weren't sure what they were going to be. And then they constantly are changing, and it is difficult for them to deal with it. And it is driving them, along with interest rates, into the ground right now. So I've co-opted the word tariff and respelled the word terrified to be spelled Tariffed. And the spell check didn't like that, but I overwrote it.
So, and we were just mentioning it, just a related thing. I was just recently down in Long Beach, California, and it was fascinating. It was such a difference. I remember flying over, by the way, in COVID, when the COVID shortage happened, and there was literally, I remember counting over, I think over 100 ships out in the water waiting to get into port. This time, there was barely any ships, relatively speaking. Maybe there was 15 that was sitting out in the water. An organization we were working with who is in this industry has seen way less activity. Based on your knowledge, what's going on right now? Why is there way less ships today compared to even in 2025?
So what gets announced most often is the traffic at the ports of Long Beach and LA, because they have the largest volume of everything that's going on. And they actually, not surprising, in June and July, they had record months for the number of containers that they processed. Well, that was then, this is now. And what happened was that people were pre-ordering before tariffs went into place to try to get them in here in time before the tariffs could take hold, because there were lots of regulations buried in the executive directives as to exactly how and when you counted something to be tariffed. In fact, in the last several months, there were people creating trade-free zones that didn't exist before. Let's find a warehouse, let's call it a tariff, a free trade zone, and we'll get stuff into there as fast as we can so that it's not covered by tariffs. And maybe the tariffs will go down later, so when we actually do the final shipment, the price is different. So that's the biggest thing we've seen. You may not be aware of this, but several years ago, of course, they enlarged the Panama Canal. And all of the things that I was looking at on a regular basis through places like FTR Transportation Intelligence, they were always reporting only on the West Coast ports. And I said, well, what about the East Coast ports? They've been dredging to make it allow to get those bigger ships that are coming through the Panama Canal. And, maybe I influenced them, but now they report on all the ports because there is a flow back and forth depending on, are ships being attacked in the Red Sea? Well, then we're going to go to this port. Or it changes dramatically all the time. And that changes every one of those manufacturers' cost of transportation in getting their landed costs, which leads to another subject way to get into is what is their cost of goods sold and how do you calculate it and which ones do you want to do? So that pre-ordering was a huge factor in what was happening there, and we're going to see lower things going on right now. And the biggest thing you and I talked about, my wife saw her Amazon cart prices jump by 50% this week. What a surprise, because the exemption for the de minimis shipments of less than $800, which, when she buys a small item, pair of slippers, it's a de minimis kind of thing. And over a week ago, the postal services around the world, the shippers like DHL, stopped accepting shipments to the U.S. because they didn't know how to handle and deal with the exemption of the de minimis going away. So that's going to have a factor on what's happening as we go forward into the second half of this year, and see that I'm expecting that volumes are going to go down. Now, surprisingly, you're a controller by experience. I'm an engineer by experience. But what I would warn people who are looking at public company stocks, for instance, is their revenue is going to go up because they're paying tariffs. And so as a result, their sales are going to go up along the way when they pass that on to their customers. But that doesn't mean their profits are going to go up in response to that increased revenue. So for investors, pay attention to both lines, top line and bottom line, and see if they are tracking or not.
So this leads to a really, I think, very relevant question. And I'm curious what you're seeing. I've seen a few things on my side, but I'm curious what you're seeing. Is how do you price products now? Traditionally, right? So I'm just saying traditionally, most manufacturers have a cost plus type arrangement. They have a cost, they do some margin increase that they're expecting to get, and then that's what they end up billing to the customer. Now you've had this massive tariff in some cases, depending on where it's being shipped in from. The question is, do you mark that up or you do not mark that up? Or can you even mark up anything at all? What are you seeing with your clients or out in the industry? What is being able to happen? What will the market bear? And how is that having an impact on margins, percentages, et cetera, as it flows through the company?
In some ways, it's a complicated question, and I'll try to approach it from a couple of different angles. So you're aware that here in the Portland area where we are, there's an extra tax in Multnomah County. There are some dealerships like mine who list that extra tax as a separate line item just as a political statement so that people understand it's not me, it's your government that's doing this. I can also go back to many different times in the trucking industry. Depending on the cost of fuel, there have been fuel surcharges applied. So you may have a contract, but because the fuel cost is higher than something that was written in the contract, we get to charge you a fuel surcharge, and that has increased. Now, when the fuel cost came down, did they get rid of the fuel surcharges in some things? No, they didn't. Once you get people used to a higher price, you can sort of keep them at a higher price. You said manufacturers tend to just have a basic markup that's based on the general in the industry. So if I'm a contract electronics manufacturer and I can get 25% margin, that's pretty darn good. If I'm a software developer, I'm looking at 75-80% gross margins. If I'm a custom metalworking company, I might be looking at 45% margins. And so I'll kind of base my pricing based on that. But somehow you have to look against what the competition are doing, and everybody should be trying to sell themselves on value. So you take a company like Daimler Truck that I worked at. We put things out for bid, and the bidding committee included people from aftermarket, from the plant, from engineering, from purchasing, all with different perspectives and goals that they had to achieve for their own careers. And the person with the lowest cost wouldn't necessarily win the bid, because the plant guy might say, yeah, but that guy always gets it to my dock on time, and they are sequenced correctly coming out of that trailer, so I don't get into more problems. I like that supplier. So you can still do some value-based pricing even in manufacturing if you've got good relationships and you've got a good story that you can back up with facts.
Yeah, I think there's a well-stated answer. First of all, it is a bit of a trick question when I say that, because I've seen just a lot of companies in the past just really blindly cost plus. Like, it's just like, hey, we make 62% margins, and so boom, there you go. The problem, right? And then there's other companies that are very good at what I call market-based pricing. Regardless of what our cost is, we're going to charge what the market bears, or the value that can be perceived based on because we're on time, or we have really high quality, or we have a color that you like that nobody else can get, right? That would be more value-based pricing. But one of the, I would argue, mistakes that some companies are making out there is, I love that you did that example of, okay, it's a fuel surcharge or a tax on a Multnomah County tax. You're just passing that through. Right? You're not trying to make more markup off of it. You're just passing it through as a tax. And I think a lot of people are doing that right now. And they might even not even be passing, quote unquote, the full amount of it, quote unquote. They might be bearing and trying to get through it. But and part of the reason why is their concern that if they mark up the tariff, which is not the intent, that's not really the additional value behind it, that they won't be able to sell that product in the market, right? And so they're doing more of a try to pass through as much as they can to still make sure they're making the same gross margin dollars, but the gross margin percentage is taking a hit, right? And so that's the real interesting thing is of this, where sometimes they get so concerned about gross margin percentage versus gross margin dollars. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, Paul, gross margin dollars matters more than gross margin percentage. I could be wrong.
Yes.
It depends on what it is, of course.
Well, cash is king, queen, and jack. So I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I have a colleague who wrote a book about something called the long tail. So you have a certain number of products that you sell high volume, you get the margins that you want, and then you got a whole bunch of products and they go down here, and you still got 400 SKUs out there that you have on the books. You've got inventory buried out here that is never going to turn. You got things turning up here at 20, and you got things down here turning it once every 4 years, kind of thing. You talked about talking to a friend who needed to restructure. Well, that's a good place to restructure. If you're going to keep those low volume, low inventory turn items, they should not be getting the same margins, gross margins, as you're talking here. You could easily raise those prices considerably and not impact what your sales are going to be, because it might be some strange pump motor that you only sell once in a while when one of the old ones breaks somewhere out there in the country or out in the world on a drilling platform of some sort. They can handle the extra costs. So find a way, look at what you've got going on in your business and increase the prices where you can.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Find the right way. What I get concerned about is, well, it kind of goes back to that terrified thing. I like that. I might have to borrow that from you, Paul.
You're welcome to it. I don't trademark anything.
Well, and I'll coin you saying it for sure. But I'm curious for you, with, once again, people you're working with, how much are they moving their manufacturing now to new locations?
They can't find anybody to move it to. They can't even find somebody to supply it from a different country. If they even know where they're getting it. Many of the manufacturers are small and they buy from stocking distributors of stuff. So you may be buying steel, but you have no idea where it came from. Did it come from Canada? Did it come from Pittsburgh? Where did it come from? They don't know. And chances are the distributor isn't even keeping track of that information in their inventory, with first in or first out or last in, first out. It doesn't matter. They didn't say who it came from. So they have troubles with that. And then trying to just source something you're getting from China somewhere else, just another country. That's the first step that they will do. If it's made in China, can I get it from Vietnam? And they're not worrying about whether or not what's really happening is China is shipping it to Vietnam. Vietnam is taking it out of the box, putting it in another box, slapping a label on it, and calling it that they have added some value and trying to get past the customs and enforcement. Well, they're getting stricter on that you have to actually add some significant value to make that happen. And with all the different regulations, that's why we go external. We can't afford to manufacture some things here in the United States with our labor requirements, our environmental requirements, our human expectations, compared to other countries around the world. And you're just not going to be able to resource those. I do like the fact that there's an attempt to try to lock up precious metals and materials, lithium, and other things that are needed for batteries in getting a supply around the world other than from China, because that's been a weak spot in the supply chain for a lot of things that are going on that are be for our future.
I thought that was a really interesting answer you said, which is, can they even find, right, somebody else? Even prior to the tariff, right, there was such a, once again, those who have been following, China was number one for a while and as a number one importer. And then with the tariffs that have been happening since the first Trump administration, and even with Biden actually reinstalling a lot of the old tariffs that had been there had been significant movement to Mexico. And what was interesting was even getting in places in Mexico, the prices were rising quite significantly for those who are moving towards it. Now you have people considering, okay, can I quote unquote, make it here in the US? And you said all those real restrictions. And then if they are actually made here, there's significant automation. I recently saw a picture of, I think, a Hyundai plant that's in Georgia, and there wasn't a person in view, right? It was all robots that were, now, if you're a robot engineer, so to speak, you have a job, right? Because those are going to have to be maintained, and then the actual mechanical part of that is going to be maintained to make sure they're still working consistently. Wow. So what are you seeing there in terms of, if you change, go ahead, please.
If I may, if you look at a high volume manufacturing plant anywhere in the world, even here in the United States, I'm not trying to be gender biased or anything, but if you look out at the people that are working in those manufacturing cells, you'll find a high proportion of women who are doing the work. They are capable with their fingers and with their approach to things to being able to do more detailed work than anywhere else. And I've seen some recent studies where they've done that. That's why Foxconn in Wisconsin has had problems with getting that particular operation up and running from some things I've read, because they don't have the right kind of people who can do that kind of job that requires a high level of dexterity and intricate detail to do something. So sorry for the diversion.
No, I think this is super fascinating direction. Okay, well, we have to go here because I think, well, not every podcast I have is going this direction, but I'm curious. Here we are, a couple years into AI being democratized, if you may, right? Meaning where every company has the access to tools like GPT to be able to accelerate so many things. I mentioned to you beforehand, Paul, you were asking, boy, Carl, this is like the third or fourth platform you're using now. Why are you using it? It's like, because my cost has gone from $450 approximately down to $25 per episode. Now, granted, once again, there's some additional things we could add on to it, but even then I could probably still do it for under $100 per episode, variable cost for each episode, not including my time. Curious, once again, from what are you seeing? And you and I both remember well the dot-com bubble, where there was a tremendous amount of waste in companies just creating things, and they went public and then they went broke, except for a handful of great companies that exist today. What are you really seeing when I call value creation in AI?
So I'm an engineer by training. So that means like a lawyer or like an accountant, words matter in how you define the word, right? Or the concept. So most people don't understand that we've had AI since the early 60s, if not earlier than that. In my career, I was working on machine intelligence in the early 90s. So you may know a bar of soap called Irish Spring. It's got green striations and white striations. At one time, they had an inspector at the end of every soap bar line taking a knife, cutting that off, and seeing, are the striations aesthetically pleasing? There are enough white and green ones. So they asked us to find a way to fix that. So I had a PhD who was in machine intelligence and pattern recognition. We had no idea how to do it, but we tried anything and everything. We had just like they do today with AI, with the large language models or anything visual, we trained it on a set of soap bars. So we asked the soap company to send us good bars, questionable bars, and bad bars. And we used that as our training. But our training was purely haphazard, ad hoc. We'd try some set of math, and then we try some other set of math. until we found something that worked, and we managed to successfully substitute cameras for the people on the line. If I had the ability today with AI to train on those visuals, I would be done in less than a week. What took me a year and a half to come up with something that was sort of okay. And if you look at printed circuit board manufacturing, we've had the ability to make sure that a solder bump on a wire or on a lead from a surface mounted chip is okay. That's AI. That's pattern recognition. It's so much easier if we could now train it on good and bad solder joints than we could in what took a decade or more of putting that into place. So what I'm seeing in what people are writing and what I see out on the factory floor is it's still harder to get on the factory floor AI used in the approach of the large language model approach versus having pattern recognition and things. If I need to have a document in manufacturing for how something should be done, AI is a great way to write that process documentation, which you need. And you know from selling a company, if you got documentation and it's up to date, that's going to make your company that much more valuable. What I am seeing, because I'm involved in transportation as well, we have a lot of cameras that are being used to look at traffic scenes, not just for autonomous vehicle operation, but just to see if people are doing things right. A simple example is the latest cars all have the ability with the cameras that they have in them to be able to recognize a speed limit sign and then post that inside your instrument cluster and give you a warning, flash it, or even an audible warning if they want, telling you that you're over the speed limit. That's one level. We have the ability with truck driver facing cameras to tell whether that driver's using a cell phone, whether they're smoking, whether they've leaned down to pick up a wrapper from their chocolate bar, and whether they're taking a drink on their big gulp and not paying attention. That's all being done with the help of AI now that is processing that one guy calls it at the edge or right on the vehicle, on the camera itself, rather than having to record it, pass it back over telecommunications to somebody who then spends hours going through it by hand to determine whether or not it is a problem or not. So the AI is being applied to eliminate having to get the data remotely, have a human analyze it, but have it done immediately right there in the camera in real time. That's where the NVIDIA chips and Qualcomm chips and others are being introduced.
Yeah, I once again, for our different things that we've been doing when we work with companies and where we see it working and not working. A little example, I did a presentation just this past week, and something that the vision, this, Paul, the writing a vision statement. Okay.
Yeah, I heard that. You'd say that on one of your podcasts too. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, old days, right? It would take hours and sometimes months, right, to come up with the word, the one thing, and the rapid ability to say, here's my thoughts, right, into a learning model, and then go, now, based on this, give me 10 different versions of this. And then from there, right, we could discern so much faster. I literally in the presentation where something, and this person was actually, I literally kind of randomly pulled a person out of the crowd and said, let's do your vision value exercise right now. Not just a vision statement, a vision future. We came up with it, ran through ChatGPT, and within like something that now we get down to typically 90 minutes with like a leadership team, we did in this room, and we were going faster than normal, and there wasn't as much depth that you typically would talk about. In basically 30 minutes, less than 30 minutes, we'd come up with a completely envisioned future. For me, who frankly doesn't like to speak, you mentioned the importance of words. I sometimes feel people spend a little too much time on making sure the right word, even though I do realize they matter. The speed, though, to getting to something, to get to what I call functional value, right? Where ultimately what's being said has more clear functionality and so much faster, because then you could continue to spend what the real energy and value is, which is, okay, now that we're aligned with that, let's start moving forward on where we're trying to head towards. So taking to the next step of, we talk about back office, we talk forward office. I was curious with you when you talked about vehicles, because they've been talking about automize, using basically trucks, right, in the future, and they will be replaced. Right. How real is that? And if it is real, how long is that going to be till it really starts happening?
So there are trucks hauling freight successfully right now, real time, in the Southwest United States, particularly from Southern California, even all the way to Florida, but primarily in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, because those states are passing regulatory laws that make it a little more possible to make that happen. However, one of the vehicle OEMs, PACCAR, you can look it up, they said, we still want a driver in there, just in case. We understand, you don't have to, but we're a big company, liability maybe. We're going to demand that there still be somebody in there at this point in time. So it's happening, but it's not entirely there yet. Where we're at right now is still a driver is probably in the seat, or there is somebody who can remotely control the vehicle. And in some rare instances, there are some that are actually working autonomously in limited environments, i.e., on an interstate highway.
Yeah, right.
So in those cases, you need somebody at a truck stop to inspect the vehicle and make sure that it's okay for it to maneuver and get on the highway. And then you need somebody at the other end. Now, maybe it's twice as far as a human driver could go because he's limited to 11 hours of driving. So it could be 20 hours before that truck has to stop. So that's how it gets from LA to Atlanta much faster than a driver could do. That's good. That's an efficiency improvement, productivity improvement. So it's coming, but you noticed I said where that was?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing going on the Trans-Canadian Pacific Highway, Trans-Canadian Intercontinental Highway. It's cold. Batteries don't like cold.
Mm-hmm.
Engines don't like cold.
That's right.
It's too slippery. There's a lot more difficulty with proving it in those environments. So it's a while. In my career, I have started things from scratch, and it's taken 30 years from patent to high volume production. So we're about 15 years, maybe less into this autonomous vehicle stuff. I remember talking with a startup back in 2010 and 12. So that's 13 years. So it's still in 2040, sure. And even then in 2040, it's going to be, I think, still in limited operations as to where it is.
Paul, as we're seeing, we've been talking about, first the beginning, tariffs change, really difficult, really challenging environment. So that's number one. Two, here we have the continued discussions of what we're observing and seeing in terms of AI impacting. What are you recommending? Well, here, let me pull back for a moment. I am terrified of small businesses going out of business because of not just what I'd say from what I call almost the marketing. They had no idea that a private equity companies come in to their geographic region, put the money into search engines, into the new AI engines, if you may. And now a small company can't be seen because people aren't going onto Google anymore to search and find things. They're going on to ChatGPT or Perplexity and things like that. So the old Google AdWords aren't working like they used to, the tried and true thing for the past 15 years. I'm concerned for small companies who aren't adapting and taking serious some of the things that are not just happening in the how we do business, but how we get business, right? And I might be overstating some of this, but I'm actually seeing it. I'm seeing some of these things take place with companies, and they don't realize what's being built up in the PE world where consolidation of industries are taking place. And somebody who thought they had a nice, quiet electric, HVAC company, all of a sudden can't figure out why they can't get work anymore. So what do you recommend for small to mid-sized business in terms of strategy? What do they need to do looking into 2026 to make sure they're staying competitive?
So I have to break up my answer maybe into two different parts based on my experience. I do pro bono consulting through an organization called SCORE, which has been part of the soon-to-be defunct Small Business Administration, and its funding has been drastically cut from $25 million to $5 million. And so that's going to impact the small businesses. They can't get the free consulting, and a lot of it is in the area of marketing and SEO optimization and things like that. It's going to be hard for somebody we're not going to be talking just about keywords anymore. We're going to need something that is more prose oriented. So when you have an about section on your website, you better have a good about section with some good writing. Use a large language model to help you write that. Have it, you can probably tell it that you want it to write it in such a way that Google algorithms or Gemini or ChatGPT algorithms will put it at a higher rate. It also means you're going to have to write more often, because the new way of doing things in the ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, and all those worlds, it's based on not just the keywords, but on the volume of content, the thought processes you have. So if I were a restaurant owner, I would be having a lot more testimonials out there and taking one every chance I get. I would have the chef doing a little video each time he comes up with a new dish. So I belong to the 12th and Country Club, and the note today just said, hey, we're about to change the menu. It's fall. All new food going to go on. Well, just putting up a menu wouldn't be the same as having the chef or the sous chef or a marketing person or one of the waiters or waitresses start talking about it. When my wife wants to order something at a restaurant, she always asks the server, what about this or this? And she listens to what the person is saying. That's the kind of marketing that small business is going to have to do when it's oriented at consumers. And maybe it's not that much different when you start talking business to business. Some of the businesses you've worked for, maybe you remember something called ThomasNet, the Thomas Built books, they're gone. And that was just a list of keywords, basically. Well, what you need now as a business is you need to write up about those products. You need to have small videos in order to be able to describe them and get them noticed as to what people are doing. You need to be out there, as consultants, we understand you need to be out there speaking in whatever form that could take. I had a chance not too long ago to help somebody sell one of these Clipper coupon magazines that we get in the mail. I can't believe that they're still doing that. They go from the mailbox to the recycling bin in my house at this point in time. But 20, 30 years ago, they came in and my wife was clipping those coupons and buying based on those coupons. Not anymore. So be more adept at using large language models, ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, whatever it is, to talk more about your product in prose on your website, on a blog that you have. Yeah, how many restaurants have a blog? Would be my guess if I start looking at the restaurants that I go to.
Yeah.
But they should.
That's right. Yeah. Paul, you've done a great job of explaining content. The future is content and how. And you're never it's funny in Home Depot world, it depends on, of course, what business you do. But I think that restaurant example is perfect. The importance of daily content, daily. And even this, Paul, this one podcast, you can pull 7-second reels and throw them out for the next 3 weeks. That folks that's why it's I don't have time for this. Yes, you can make time once a week to record one podcast and take that data and then split it out into 7, 10, 15, 30 pieces of quote unquote social media, right? It's not as hard as we think.
I'll bet that you teach as I do with my frameworks and your 40 Captain and others that I know of, that you need meetings. Meetings are how you communicate. Meetings are how you learn things. Whether you're talking EOS or there's probably something in your 40 Captain, you need one-on-ones with your employees. Well, what if once a month you could record that and then have somebody turn that into content that can be put out? It doesn't take extra time when you do that. Maybe it takes a few extra bucks to have somebody do something with it, but you and I also are interested in the next generation. What high school kid couldn't take that and make some edits for you and would do it free as an internship?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And they're gonna have fun doing it, right?
Yeah.
In their process. So, Paul, we gotta wrap up here. Any just kind of last 60 seconds for our audience. I think you described some really good things from the marketing perspective and what you could do. What are some last tips or that you would recommend as we wrap up here?
A strong believer in you need to know not just your customer, but your customer's customer, your customer. You need to know the entire distribution chain. Some of the companies that I deal with, they are manufacturers, but they use sales agents or they use stocking distributors or non-stocking distributors in order to get their product out. And so they really don't know who their customer is very much. And so you need to know that and understand all of the markups that go along, because we started out talking about pricing and cost of goods sold. It doesn't matter if your margin's this and the next guy's margin is a whole lot more. You need to understand that. And that's why e-commerce has replaced so many of those people, is that it's a lower cost. A lot of small companies I talk to, that 30% that the e-commerce platforms get, it's worth it. They're making good money, but it's hard. And you need to understand whether you can make money with giving that much of the price up to somebody else.
That's right. Paul, apologize there. We are going to wrap up. Paul, once again, for those who haven't seen your work, where can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
So my website is businessaccelerants.com. paulmenig.com will route there. And I'm lucky that there's only 2 Paul Menigs in the world. So LinkedIn will show me up quite well. So those are the best places to reach out to me.
Paul, thank you so much for being a guest on the Measure Success podcast today.
It's been a lot of fun, Carl. Take care. Don't be terrified.
I love that finish. Once again, to everyone else who's listening, I hope you've enjoyed Paul's wisdom. Paul has been a really good friend along the years as I've been along my journey. I've appreciated his wisdom, his guidance, and helping me along the way to help grow. So thank you truly, Paul, for all the insights you helped provided for me. And I hope you do. I encourage you to go out. He has a great book out there, and he has really, really good insights. He's really in tune, especially with the industries and small to mid-sized businesses. So go out, take a look at what he's doing. And we also like to say, please share with others this content, this information. We are excited for you as a small to mid-sized business owner and those who are part of one. You can survive and win in the future, but you won't if you don't change. You're going to have to adapt and do the right things, because the future is changing rapidly, as you know, and we want you to be successful. So with that, as we always like to say, wishing you the very best at measuring your success. Have a great day.